Crystal Ball College Football. I'm your host, Grayson. For today, we're doing part 2 of our week 2 preview. We're going to go through a few games, 3 games to be specific, and I'm going to give you kind of my general thoughts, predictions, and just an overview of the matchups and kind of what to expect going into these games after what we saw in week 1 of the season. So the first matchup let's start with is South Carolina traveling to Fayetteville to take on Arkansas. Arkansas is an 8.5-point favorite. The over-under is 53 points. South Carolina knocked off Georgia State in really a not impressive performance, 35-14. Arkansas knocked off a ranked Cincinnati team, 31-24, a game that ended up being a lot closer than it was at the beginning. So looking at South Carolina to start, I just did not like what I saw from them on either side of the ball. They were outgained by Georgia State, despite the fact that the quarterback for Georgia State was 7 for 29 throwing the football. Spencer Rattler had 2 interceptions. They were 3 of 14 on third down. They only had 79 yards rushing, 2.5 yards per carry. It was not good. Not good at all. In fact, their defense was even bad. They gave up 200 yards on the ground, and that included 5 yards per carry for this Georgia State team. I did not like what I saw from South Carolina at all. They were just not physical up front. It felt like offensively they were trying to be a little too cute with Spencer Rattler back there, and they weren't able to just turn around and hand the ball off and get production in the run game, which ultimately is what's going to save Spencer Rattler this year, is if South Carolina can actually run the football. On the flip side, they're playing an Arkansas team that ran for 224 yards, 5 yards per carry against a pretty good Cincinnati defense. They got KJ Jefferson, who was awesome, 223 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 62 yards on the ground, and a touchdown as well. Rocket Sanders had 117 yards. There's just this clear identity of, hey, you know what? We're going to run the football with our quarterback and our best running back, and we're going to run over you. And the problem is that South Carolina got ran over by Georgia State, and now they're facing a team that can really, really run the football. In fact, their identity is to run the football. They're giving up 250 yards rushing against Arkansas. So you tell me if that's a good combination, because they are 100% going to give that up on Saturday. The defense for Arkansas had 3 sacks. They gave up 438 yards. So they absolutely got impacted in the secondary. They had some injuries in the secondary, Arkansas did, so we'll see if those guys are back this week. But those 438 yards to go along with 24 points allowed in the second half, that's not great. They really took a step back in the second half, so maybe that's an area where South Carolina can exploit them a little bit. In the passing game, creating some explosive plays and actually getting Spencer Rattler comfortable in the pocket. If they can do those things, they might have some success, but I'm not betting on it. I got Arkansas in this game. Even with the 8.5 points, I think they're going to win this game by double digits. I feel really good about what Arkansas showed last week, and I didn't feel good about what South Carolina showed, and I think that's going to bear itself out this week in Fayetteville. Next matchup up, Alabama traveling to Austin, Texas to take on the Texas Longhorns. It's college game day. Alabama is a 20-point favorite. The over-under is 62 points. Yeah, I mean, this is a great matchup, right? Bama going to Austin. They're going to take on this Longhorns team that has a lot of promise. A lot of people are really high on Texas this year, excited about that offense. And I felt like they looked pretty good in week 1. But it was more so the defense that I felt like kind of stole the show a little bit for Texas that first week. They only gave up 259 yards and only 3 points in meaningful time. UL Monroe scored late in the game when all the starters were out. I don't really count that. They looked really solid when the starters were in there. They only gave up 2.2 yards per carry. I know ULM is bad, but that is a major improvement from the Texas team I saw a year ago on the defensive side. And they have a lot of talent. You know, Deshaun Jameson, Ryan Watts, they have guys in that secondary who might be able to make some plays and create some turnovers and create some sparks for them, but they've always had talent. They're going to have to be physical on Saturday. They're going to have to be able to hold up front. I'm not sure if I buy it yet, but I will say this was a nice step in the right direction with their week 1 performance. Quinn Ewers, he was solid. I felt like he had an interception, but 225 yards, 2 touchdowns. He moved the offense pretty well. In general, they were pretty effective. I wouldn't say it was the overwhelming fireworks show that I think some people were expecting, But in general, he was solid. And there's athletes out there that are very good with Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, Bijan Robinson. They have some guys, but my issue is the running attack. And that's just simply the biggest issue here. Bijan Robinson is the best player on this football team, and they played the 111th worst defense in the country from a year ago. And while they ran for 4.6 yards per carry, they weren't dominating up front by any means. They also gave up 3 sacks in the game. That's going to have to change. They're going to have to find a way to run the football a little bit to take pressure off Quinn Ewers from having to stand in that pocket and look at the pressure that Bama's going to bring him. I just think that's a recipe for disaster. They got to be able to get Bijan going early and often in this game. On the flip side, Alabama, they won 55-0. They looked so good. They didn't even score in the fourth quarter, and they scored 55 points. Bryce Young, 6 touchdowns. He was terrific. Jahmyr Gibbs, the Georgia Tech transfer, who's their running back, he looked phenomenal as well, averaged over 10 yards per carry. Really liked what I saw there. Treshawn Holden and Jermaine Burton are going to be awesome in that Alabama offense. You're just seeing them reload at receiver. Whether it's through the transfer portal or whether it's through recruiting, they just continue to reload. And that's what they've done this year to put talent around Bryce Young, who we all know, very, very phenomenal. I will say they didn't have any sacks in this game, which I found rather interesting. For as dominant as they are up front, no sacks. It's not alarming by any means, but it was just a little nugget that I took away from the game that I just kind of was like, oh, is Alabama maybe not going to get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, or was this more a function of Utah State just kind of throwing the ball away and getting away from sacks and being able to avoid them? Maybe, because Bama only allowed 136 total yards of offense, which is absolutely ridiculous against a team that won their conference a year ago. That's crazy to me. So in general, I think Bama's going to win this game. I think this is going to hit the over 62 points. I do think there'll be quite a few points put up in this game. I think it'll probably be something like a 44-20 type game. Maybe that's giving Texas too much credit. Maybe they won't be able to put up 20 points, but I just have a feeling that they'll keep it somewhat close for probably 2.5 quarters. And then I expect Bama to pull away. So yes, I do think Bama will cover the 20-point spread in this one, but I feel most confident about the over and Bama just winning in general. The final matchup of the week that we're talking about is Baylor traveling to Provo to take on BYU. BYU is now a 3.5-point favorite in this game. 53.5 is the over-under. Pretty shocking, to be honest. BYU, that line continues to grow for BYU. So if you wait till Saturday, it might be 4.5 points towards BYU, which I find really interesting. That's a lot of confidence to be put in this BYU team who lost to Baylor a year ago. You know, they lost to Baylor 38-24 a year ago, and I'll get to that in a minute. So Blake Shapin looked really good. He looks like an upgrade for this Baylor offense from Gary Bohannon, who transferred to USF. Shapin just looked very comfortable, and Kyron Drones, the backup, came in and played well also. So the passing attack looked far more well-rounded than it did a year ago. Baylor also ran for 259 yards and 7 touchdowns. Guys like Monterey Baldwin, Hal Presley, Richard Reese, they played really well. I think Squirrel Williams, you'll see more of him most likely in this matchup against BYU. I just think in general, Baylor's got really good offense, and an offense that looks far more functional than it was a year ago and far more explosive, which I think is probably the biggest takeaway from their week 1, even though it was against Albany. On the defensive side, they only gave up 237 yards, 2.9 yards per carry, 5 yards per pass attempt. So they were really good on the defensive side. I wouldn't say that they were as overwhelming as maybe an Alabama was, but they were really, really good. And up front, they showed exactly kind of who they are. They're going to dominate up front on that defensive line. They're 8 deep there. They're really, really effective there, and it's all guys that have played a lot of college football, and that's a big deal going into this matchup. On the BYU side, they played a bad USF team, but a bad USF team that would probably beat Albany by 20 points, and they absolutely hammered them. 573 yards of total offense, 8.4 yards per carry, which is just absurd. USF played 0 defense in this game. It was actually quite shocking to see how bad they were on the defensive side. Cal transfer Christopher Brooks is now the lead back at BYU. So he's replacing Tyler Algier, and he looked really solid. Very fast, very strong, a patient runner who I think kind of gives them a nice balance, which is what they need. They need to be able to run the football. They want to run the football, and I think he's a pretty nice replacement for Tyler Algier, who's now an Atlanta Falcon. We'll see what they're going to look like in the passing game. They have Jaron Hall, who's great at quarterback. We know that. He's a proven commodity, a very, very good player, but his weapons are looking a little iffy right now. Puka Nacua, he left on crutches, so he's dealing with an injury. He's been dealing with an injury for a while, but to see him leave on crutches is never a good sign, and he had a massive performance in this game against USF. It was like every time he touched the ball, it felt like it was going to be a touchdown. I will say that Kalani Sitake, the head coach at BYU, did say there was precautionary reasons why they did that, so I do think he'll play. The other receiver who's in doubt is Gunnar Romney, who didn't play against USF, but again, Sitake said that he's getting close. If they're there, it makes a huge difference for this BYU offense. If both of them miss, I think they're going to have major problems against this Baylor defense. On the defensive side for BYU, they gave up 4 yards per carry, but only 279 yards of total offense, and a lot of that came in garbage time when the starters were out. So I said I would bring up last year's game, and I have to, I feel like, because both these teams returned so much. Now, maybe both are improved a little bit on both sides of the ball. I think both are significantly improved on the offensive side. But remember, Baylor won this game 38-24. BYU scored with 1:51 left in that game, so it really was a 38-17 game. It was not very close. Baylor ran for 303 yards in last year's game. So I'm just sitting here going, why is Baylor not going to run the football on BYU? They did a year ago. Both teams are returning basically the same offensive and defensive lines. What's going to change? Maybe it's the altitude. Maybe it's the fact that you're playing on the road. That definitely could be a concern. But I think in general, Baylor's going to find a way to move the football. Now, I think BYU will as well, which is why I'm taking the over 53.5 for this game. I think both teams are going to score points, but I think in general, everyone's kind of counting on Baylor to not be able to score in this game, and I don't think that's going to be the case. Baylor's going to be able to score enough. That Dave Aranda defense is going to be able to create some havoc against BYU and create some turnovers that I don't think BYU will be able to force, especially in the sack department. I think that's a huge advantage for the Baylor side. So I think Baylor will win this game. I mean, they're getting 3.5 points. That's pretty nice. I think Baylor's definitely going to take that, get the win. They get 3.5 points. I also think the over is a very nice bet as well, which is at 53.5 currently. So that's it for the previews for this week. I'll have some of my best bets tomorrow for the week, and it won't count any of the games that I previewed, but more so just some general bets that I really like. But thanks for tuning in. This has been Grayson Grunhaver on Crystal Ball College Football.